Hi, my name is Michael Wiles, and for my structural failure project, I chose the World Trade Centers. We all know the story about what happened on September 11, 2001, but let's stop for a few minutes and recap to determine why the World Trade Center buildings collapsed that day. It was a beautiful, picture-perfect morning in New York City that started off just like any other day. The sun was shining, and there was not a cloud in the sky. Then tragedy struck. Two hijacked planes dropped out of the sky and hit the World Trade Center buildings. The North Tower was struck at 8:46 a.m. and collapsed at 10:28 a.m., just 102 minutes later. The South Tower was hit at 9:03 a.m. and collapsed at 9:59 a.m., just 56 minutes later. So, why did these structures fail? Well, reason number one, heat from the massive amount of burning jet fuel. The hijackers chose flights that were scheduled to fly across the country. Both American Airlines Flight 11, which struck the North Tower, and United Airlines Flight 175, which struck the South Tower, were both flying from Boston, Massachusetts to Los Angeles, California that day. Because of the distance, they were both loaded down in jet fuel. It is estimated that both planes were carrying 10,000 gallons of jet fuel that morning. The extreme heat from the jet fuel burning ultimately melted the steel columns and framing, which gave way to a total building collapse. So why did the South Tower collapse in half the amount of time? The difference in the amount of time was due to where each of the towers were hit. The North Tower was hit between the 93rd and 99th floors, whereas the South Tower was hit between the 77th and 85th floors. This in turn allowed the heat from the burning jet fuel to compromise the lower steel structures of the South Tower much faster due to the point of impact. So by now you may be asking yourself, how was the jet fuel able to access and melt the steel columns? Weren't the steel columns protected by any fireproofing? Which brings us to reason number two. Yes, the World Trade Center's metal supported columns were insulated with spray-on fireproofing materials in the 1960s when the towers were constructed. Since 9/11, it has been estimated that American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower at approximately 465 miles per hour, and United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower at approximately 590 miles per hour. During the investigation, experts found that the insulation used around the support columns was not adequate and broke off the columns when the buildings were jarred by the extreme impact they sustained. This in turn left the metal columns exposed to the massive heat from burning jet fuel, and at 1,100 degrees, the steel columns began to weaken. The third reason the World Trade Center buildings collapsed was due to structural design flaws. During the 1960s, steel structures used a cage of interior columns and beams to carry most of the load. However, the Twin Towers relied on a steel core and closely spaced exterior steel columns that supported the structures. These columns were seen on the outside of each building. Each face of the towers contained 61 steel columns that were pre-assembled into panels that were 36 feet high and 10 feet wide. In each building's core, there were 47 interior columns, which housed elevators and stairwells. However, the outer perimeter of steel columns supported much of the building's weight. Floors were supported by horizontal steel beams that connected the outer perimeter of steel columns to the central core area. After the plane's impact, the interior and exterior framing of the buildings was severely compromised, weakening the structures even further. Ultimately, the damage that both towers sustained were more than the steel structures could withstand, and it was just a matter of time until the entire buildings failed. after the steel columns melted and buckled, the building floors compressed upon themselves and fell straight down, floor by floor, killing thousands of innocent people. One major thing we have learned from the World Trade Center's collapse since 9/11, we now understand and use a much safer fireproofing on today's structures. This upgraded insulation is designed to not break off if the building sustains extreme movement and or a major impact. Unfortunately, this knowledge and new technology came a little too late. May we never forget. Thank you, and here are my sources.